We've co-slept with our kids for over 7 years, and naturally in the Western world, often it raises a few questions. So I put out a question box to my Instagram followers and I was inundated with hundreds and hundreds of questions. So I'm going to get to some of those in this video today, as well as diving into why I believe that every new and expecting parent should be made aware of safe co-sleeping practices. Now, this isn't a recommendation video. I'm not recommending that people co-sleep. It's a very personal decision. However, I do want to unpick some of the facts around co-sleeping. I want to promote the importance of safe co-sleeping. I want to acknowledge why it's important. Every parent should be aware of safe co-sleeping practices, and I also want to get to some of those questions as well. If you're new here, hi, I'm Tom from the Dad Vibes. I share content to help parents feel more confident, but also reduce stress and help them to parent without punishment, yelling, or guilt. So let's dive in. Okay, so first a little bit about our personal co-sleeping journey. So it started 7 years ago when my wife started breastfeeding. Naturally, it was an ideal way for her to breastfeed through the night. So we started co-sleeping, and then the co-sleeping practice evolved over time. When I talk about co-sleeping, it's about keeping baby within sensory range. So we evolved that depending on his age, whether it was a separate sleeping surface in the same room, whether it was on our bed in a safe and manageable way, whether it was in a sidecar connected to the bed that was open into the bed. So it essentially evolved over time, and I'll get to some of that when I dive into the questions a little bit later as well. So why do we co-sleep? Now, a spoiler alert, the reason we co-sleep primarily is because it works for us. We all get a great night's sleep. We've never forced our kids to go into their own room. Our oldest, who's 7.5, went into his own room when he was 4.5. But before all of that, he had his own room. He had it decorated, he had his own bed, he had his toys in there. It was a space where he could play. But it wasn't till our second was born that he decided he was ready for his own room, and now he sleeps in there and sleeps independently. Our youngest, who's just turned 3, we're also co-sleeping. She sleeps in the center of our bed between my wife and I. And again, we're on a similar journey. When she's ready, she's got her own room, it's decorated, it's got her own bed, her toys, her books. And when she's ready, she's even talked about sleeping in there already. Now, I think it's really important to acknowledge that when parents intentionally co-sleep, you are opening the door to certain sleep associations. Certain people frame these negatively. However, I'm going to frame them as sleep associations because it's an intentional decision that my wife and I have decided to make, and we enjoy this. Both our children, both the 7.5-year-old and the 3-year-old, require us for them to fall asleep. Now, when I say us, we have had the odd night away here and there, and thankfully my mother-in-law is on board with the way we parent. She's happy to lay with both our kids as they fall asleep, but they are dependent on us to fall asleep. When I talk to parents, they say, well, you know, how do you do sleepovers, or how do they fall asleep anywhere else? Now, when we go away a lot as a family. We're always aware of sleeping arrangements wherever we go. We want a big bed, for example. So it's just about doing due diligence and research. But obviously there are 2 of us. So when we are away, we both do bedtime individually with each of the children. If one of us is away for work, for example, then we'll just lay in the middle and both of them will snuggle in and fall asleep. Sleepovers, that isn't something we entertain as parents. It's an individual choice. Not something I would recommend. We're starting to navigate that a little bit with our 7.5-year-old. He's been invited to a few sleepovers, but it's just something that we don't entertain, and we're not going to entertain. And that sort of brings us up to date as to where we are. Now, if you want to be intentional with co-sleeping, you do need to make a number of sacrifices. Certainly not that no drugs is a sacrifice, but certainly no drinking, no drugs if you're bed sharing. When my wife and I had both of our kids when they were a lot younger, when they were babies, if they did come into the bed, no duvets. We had 2 very thin, lightweight, breathable blankets. pillows out of harm's way, nothing else on the bed. And obviously my wife was breastfeeding, which makes it a lot safer. I'll share some safe co-sleeping practices in the description below as well. Now, why do I believe co-sleeping is super important in educating new and expecting parents? Well, number one, in the Western world, it's a taboo subject, so nobody talks about it because they associate it with danger. However, when we look at SID rates, they're very rare. They make up 0.03% of all births, so it will never be possible to eliminate all risk. However, with sensible, parent-centered communication, we can potentially reduce co-sleeping SIDS by nearly 90%. So why do I say this? Well, when you look at SID rates, certainly in the UK, 50% are when the baby is sleeping in isolation, so on their own surface. 50% are when the baby is co-sleeping. However, when you look at those co-sleeping numbers, 90% are due to hazardous and preventable conditions. It means that by having a conversation about co-sleeping, by not shying away from it, by educating new and expecting parents that everyone has the potential to fall into a co-sleeping situation, therefore putting their baby in potential danger, by having these conversations, we have the opportunity to massively reduce this rate, because really, it's only people that intentionally want to co-sleep that are researching safe co-sleeping practices. However, every parent needs to be aware of them. I always talk about certain examples. So let's say Dave from Dagenham. So Dave has just come off a 12-hour night shift. He's tired, he's exhausted, but he's excited to get home and see his brand new baby, who's just a month old. Dave gets home, he picks up his baby, he snuggles his baby in, he sits on the sofa, puts on Netflix, but Dave is tired. Now, what Dave is doing there is he is unintentionally placing his baby into a very dangerous co-sleeping situation. Now, Dave has no intention of co-sleeping. He's never dreamt of researching any safe co-sleeping practices because he's not going to co-sleep. However, by holding his baby sitting on the sofa, he is co-sleeping or putting his baby in a co-sleeping situation, and ultimately a dangerous situation. If you're tired and exhausted in the middle of the night and you pour your baby onto your chest and you fall asleep, you're putting your baby into a dangerous co-sleeping situation. I appreciate these things happen, but by not having the conversation, by not promoting safe co-sleeping practices, we can't educate new and expecting parents. Now, that is why I truly believe that every new and expecting parent should be invested in understanding what safe co-sleeping practices are. Now, I'm going to do separate videos on safe co-sleeping practices, but for this video, I'm going to throw everything in the description. So take some time to educate yourselves on safe co-sleeping practices and also the sacrifices you need to make if you're going to intentionally co-sleep with your baby. Okay, let's dive in to some of the many questions I got from you guys over on Instagram. I'm going to try and cover a few in this video, so let's get them up. Do you wait until your youngest falls asleep and then go downstairs, or does she fall asleep alone after stories and hugs? Now, no, as I've said previously in this video, both my wife and I lay with our kids until they're fully asleep. When they're asleep, we can roll away, we can go downstairs. Our 7-year-old sleeps independently. We've got a monitor for our 3-year-old. However, once she's asleep, she's asleep. To get to that point, it was quite a journey. Often from birth to maybe 2.5, she'd wake up, obviously when she was a baby, at every sleep cycle, every 90 minutes. However, when she was a toddler, she would wake up every couple of hours. Every time she woke up, we'd just head straight upstairs, lay with her, she'd go back to sleep, and then we'd come back down. Just the decision my wife and I have decided to take with both our kids. Okay, let's dive into another question. When do you think you'll stop? As I've said, no plans to stop. It's just a natural progression. Will our youngest still be in our bed at 4.5? I don't think so. She's still breastfeeding a little bit through the night for comfort, but she's super independent and she's already talking about her own room and wanting to fall asleep in her own room, so it might be something that we try over the next few weeks or months, so we shall see. Do you go away without the kids? If so, how do they settle without you? So we do, so we've been away a few times without the kids, not often. However, when we do, they're always at home and only with my mother-in-law. We go away maybe once or twice a year for a night, and they settle fine without us. I think the first time we went away from our oldest, he was 2.5, so that was a very daunting experience, a lot of anxiety. However, we woke up the next day, phoned out mother-in-law or my wife's mother, and he was absolutely fine. He woke up, I think once during the night, snuggled in to my mother-in-law, went back to sleep, woke up, it was as if we weren't even there. So it can bring a lot of anxiety when your sleep situation is this way, but it always works out okay, certainly if you've got a trusted person there who's on board with your approach. Okay, next question. So they go into your bed alone, and do you join them later or do you go to bed super early? No, so we start bedtime around 7 p.m. Our youngest is usually asleep by 8:15 when she's fast asleep. I head downstairs because I take majority of bedtimes with our youngest, and then we go up to bed. And then my wife comes down when my oldest is asleep. We have a bit of time together, and then we go upstairs when we go to bed between 11 and 12. What size mattress and bed do you have? So we have a huge Super King bed. Highly recommended if you can fit it in your room. So all 4 of us can fit in there if we need to, but at the moment it's just the 3 of us. But yeah, Super King bed, highly recommended. Are they good at sleepovers with grandparents? We don't do sleepovers, more so with his friends. However, sleepovers at grandparents just isn't something we've done, just because we rarely go away or need help during the night, other than the odd occasion if we go away, at which point my mother-in-law comes over. You've mentioned before that your youngest was downstairs with you until 15 months. How did you transition? Yeah, so I haven't actually dived into this in this video, but I would always do bedtime with our youngest and our first just in my arms downstairs, and then she'd fall asleep and I just sit there watching telly, working on the laptop with her in my arms. And that is all she knew for the first 15 months. However, it can be quite troublesome to actually do anything at that point. So when she was 15 months, I started doing bedtime in the bedroom, laying with her. That was challenging because every time I sort of rolled away, she'd wake up. Perfectly understandable because it's all she knew. However, consistency really paid off. You know, after weeks and months of sort of rolling away, she'd just sleep independently. There was a period that she'd wake up often, where we'd go upstairs, lay with her, she'd go back to sleep. But yeah, ultimately they sleep independently. But the route we've taken has been the much more sort of responsive route, which is what I'm sharing. I'm not parents to do things certain ways, I'm just trying to provide a bit of validation for parents that are choosing a similar journey. And when it comes to independence, just to give a little spoiler alert, our oldest is 7.5. We parented this way with him. He's thriving in school, he loves his sports. He's 7, but actually plays football for an under-9s team, so he's the youngest in the team, but certainly one of the most dominant players in the team. So yeah, if anyone's challenging you or pushing back, saying that you're raising a needy child, just send them this video. Have you always co-slept from when they were newborn? Yeah, so I think there's a bit of discrepancy here what co-sleeping means. I talk about keeping baby within sensory range. We've always done what's safe, so when they're super young, separate sleeping surface. We had a next to me crib. I'll put a link to that in the description below. As they grew older, I opened up the next to me crib. As they grew older, we had a huge cot that was next to the bed. A bit older again, I actually took away the side of that cot and raised the base so it was flush with our bed, and then ultimately Super King and in the bed. But that's not to say during that period they weren't in the bed with us at certain points, which is where obviously the intentional safe co-sleeping practices need to come in. Okay, and finally, do you or your wife ever work away? How do you solo bedtime with both? So yeah, my wife actually works in London often, so she's had a few nights where she's had to stay overnight in London, and essentially bedtime would be in the Super King bed. I'll lay in the middle, we'll do stories and books, and then turn off the light, and then I'll be in the middle and they'll both snuggle in. Generally, what happens at the moment is my youngest will fall asleep first, and when she does, for ease, because our oldest has got very low sleep needs and he'll stay awake all night if he could, me and him sort of roll away, pop our youngest on the monitor, and I take him into his room where I lay with him until he falls asleep and then head downstairs. So both are asleep, and then head downstairs and get a bit of time to ourselves. And that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. 7 years of co-sleeping might not be the norm in the Western world, but across the world as a whole, it's perfectly normal. But I think it's really important with this video. I just wanted to share a bit of validation for parents on a similar journey, but also I wanted to promote the importance of awareness around co-sleeping, because certainly when you dive into the numbers, it's not nice, but the SIDS numbers, 90% of those co-sleeping related figures are from hazardous and preventable situations. And without videos like this, we're not going to start the conversation, because there is a lot of scaremongering going on around co-sleeping. If you want more from me, head over to my Instagram, The Dad Vibes. I'll put links below to my Substack if you want to grab my weekly newsletter. If you want to be a bit more intentional with your parents, thedadvibes.com/toolkits, full of resources that have helped over 60,000 parents to be more intentional when it comes to reducing stress, parenting without punishment and yelling. Thanks for watching. Do leave a comment if you want more videos throughout 2026. I want to try and show up every week for you guys, so let me know.